You're listening to Manufactured with Kim van der Weert
and Jessie Lee, a podcast about sustainability and the making of fashion.
Join us every week in conversation with the people who manufacture what we wear.
Hello, Manufactured listeners. Our guest this week is Kim, not co-host Kim, but Kim from Kandal province in Cambodia.
Kim is in her late 20s, university educated, and part of a growing group of young Southeast Asian youth deeply interested in sustainability and embedded within the fashion industry.
She started her career in a fashion supply chain, working for a major logistic company responsible for organizing the transport of finished garments made in Cambodia to their destinations around the world. She later went on to work for a brand within their buying office as a quality production leader.
Have you ever thought about the complicated process of moving goods all over the world? Through Kim's experience, we gain a much deeper understanding of why freight forwarders exist and what they actually do, especially in contexts where brands do not have buying offices on the ground in the given production country. We also examine the importance of INCOTERMS, the terms which define at which point in the transportation process the seller, or the factory, bears the costs and risks associated with transportation, and at which point these are shifted to the buyer, the brand.
On-time delivery was an important theme that came up in our first two episodes, when I shared my experiences with a third-party inspection company and as a merchandising manager. Today, we return to this theme and explore how complicated it can be to locate responsibility for on-time delivery and the role of the forwarder in this picture.
Next week, in part 2 of this conversation, we'll talk to Kim about her time working for a brand within their buying office as a quality production leader. We learned so much from this conversation and so excited to share it with you. And finally, this is a passion project for us. If you want to support the content we're putting out, please rate us on iTunes. This helps other listeners find us, and we'd love your help with that. Or find us on Instagram at manufactured_podcast. Or drop us a line and tell us what you think directly at our website, manufacturedpodcast.com. Kim, can you paint us a picture of who you are? Where did you grow up? How did you get into the fashion industry? What are the different roles you've done? And what do you like about it?
I grew up in Kandal province. It takes around 45 minutes from Phnom Penh. My parents have a small grocery shop that can support the whole family. Let me begin when I get my inspiration, get into the fashion industry. It is from my first job at one of the largest logistic company. And it is where all my curiosity of the fashion industry start. At that time, I was so surprised about the process of how we are going to have the finished good from the developing small country like Cambodia to other country. And I also curious to know like how they are going to manage and control like all the raw material to make a finished good. And I also curious to know about like what kind of system that they are going to run the whole factory, like what kind of process to ensure that they have the right quality of product at the right time in the retail store. I mean, at that time I was so curious of all those kind of things. After a long journey in different jobs at different companies, I feel like it is not really easy just to hang like a cloth, for example, a t-shirt, a jean in one retail store. I mean, like it takes many process and many procedure and many regulation to make it happen.
Right. It's complicated. I think, especially on the logistics side, people often don't think about what goes into getting a product from one side of the world to the other side of the world. It just is something that kind of happens like by magic, but it's so complicated, right?
Yes, because we need to think about like the legal process, how to proceed the document. And I mean, like we need to make sure that all the finished goods were inspected by our custom before we can get it out from the country. And also need to prepare all the documents to make sure that, I mean, the destination country, they can clear the, like, for the import formality.
Mm. So your interest in the fashion supply chain really comes from, like, I guess, a desire to understand the details of how it works.
Yes, of course. Because I think I mean like because it's just like a wow, like how we can have a beautiful cloth hanging in the retail store, but I mean behind that we have many things that we need to do to make sure that it's right on time and with a good quality.
Lots of steps and lots of processes probably.
Yes.
Think about it from raw materials to cut and sewing and packing.
It's funny because when I moved to Cambodia, I kind of assumed, like, coming from I was living in Europe before I went to Cambodia, and in Europe there are not very many clothes made anymore, and so I also had the same curiosity as you just described. But I always assumed that people who were in Cambodia and closer to production would know all of these things. Like, it would, for them, for me, it was a mystery because I was far from production, but that for people like, that live and are from countries where garment production is happening, that there is somehow really obvious. So it's interesting for me to hear that actually you had sort of a similar curiosity and that it was as much of a mystery for you as for somebody who is sitting in another totally different part of the world. So let's talk about that logistics company. What exactly was your job there? And how would you describe, or could you explain a little bit about what a logistics company, in this case, what does it do? What is its role?
The logistic company that I work for, they are kind of like, we call it forwarder. And it's responsible to deliver the finished good to the destination country and have to coordinate between factory and the brand. Like to make sure that every finished good that the brand purchased from the factory need to deliver to the forwarder, and then forwarder need to be responsible to make sure that it arrive on time in the retail store.
And what was your job?
At that time, I managed several containers of finished goods departing from Cambodia every week to different destinations. And I handle for the Latin American countries like as Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and Colombia.
So you coordinated you worked with factories on the Cambodia side who were all producing for the same brand, and then organized the shipments of those goods from those factories to their final destination, where they would be sold in retail shops in different parts of Latin America.
Yeah, right. At that time I worked with around 10 to 12 factories. So every week I need to consolidate all the finished goods from each factory that have the same destination. So to ship it out. I mean, the process that factory, I mean, if they want to send out the finished good to the destination, they require first they need to make a booking through a system where factory, logistic company, and the brand are linked together. So I mean, the brand also can check the status of that purchase order, and at the same time forwarder also know where the goods are. And their finished goods need to be in logistic warehouse 1 week earlier before they can ship it out.
So logistics warehouse, you mean a warehouse that's owned by
the forwarder,
by the logistics company, by the forwarder?
Yes. And second, the goods need to be in the correct shipping window. Like, for example, the factory required to have their goods in logistic warehouse in specific period. So
who sets the shipping window? Like, let's say, for example, the goods, you as the forwarder need to receive the goods from the factory between June 15 and June 25, for example, right?
At that time, I think it was agreement between the brand and the factory.
Okay. So they have that agreement.
Yes.
And then that information gets passed to you.
Yeah, they have that kind of information. And when they make a booking to us, I can see the shipping window. And if there is a late or any delay, there will be a discussion And most of the time it will be like a full responsible of the factory.
What do you mean by that? What's what is the factory fully responsible for?
For example, if factory late to deliver the finished good to the forwarder warehouse, like most of the time I was advised by the brand to ask factory to send those goods by air, and the factory need to like responsible for all the costs.
I see. So if a factory misses the shipping window, then sometimes what happens is that the shipment needs to go by air instead, and then the factory needs to bear the costs of that.
Yes.
Okay, so you've made let's say it's within the shipping window, they've made a booking. What happens next?
For the next step is I consolidate multiple factories that go to the same destination in 2 or 3 containers. Like, for example, like go to Mexico, 2 or 3 container of 20 feet or 40 feet. And then make sure that it is maximize loading into the container so we can save the cost. And
what do you mean maximize loading? Can you explain? Can you give an example of what that means?
For example, like 20 feet container, we can load until like 25 CBM if it is only apparel.
And CBM here, you mean cubic meters, right?
Yeah. Yes. Correct. And
so you're trying to get the container as full as possible.
Yeah.
Because that effectively brings down the cost. If you get more goods into the container, then the cost per piece is less.
Yes, correct. And after that, after I consolidate, so I know that how many container that I need. So I need to book the container with the shipping company. And for the like at that time they have like between the brand and the shipping company they have like agreed what we call like agreement. So I need to book with the one that has a lower price and also a better like lead time. And the next step is after loading all the finished goods from different factory into a container. So all the container need to be inspected by Cambodian custom. And Cambodian custom, normally they are like in the same, like, it is not in, I mean, the forwarder warehouse, they have like a big area that they have a Cambodian custom over there. So when we finish, we just call the Cambodian custom so they can inspect the good. And the last step is when the container are leaving from the port, I need to update the status in the system. I mean, the system that I refer earlier that it is linked between factory, logistic, and the brand. So they can know like, okay, by looking at the system, they can know like, okay, what is the status of the good? And I need to prepare a document for factory to run the certificate of origin and send out the required document for the import formality at destination country.
Right. So the certificate of origin in these documents are documents that on the receiving end they will need in order to clear customs again.
Yes.
And those documents don't go on the boat but go by
air. Yes.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about INCOTERMS. And for our listeners who don't know, INCOTERMS are terms, or let's say predefined commercial terms, that basically signify who has responsibility for what, for which tasks, for which costs, and for which risks associated with the transportation and delivery of goods. So this might seem kind of technical, but actually it's really important because it's really important between the buyer, let's say the brand, and the seller, the factory, to make sure that the agreement is clear about who is responsible for the goods at which moment. For example, if there's a problem on the ship and the ship sinks, who bears the loss of those products, right? Or if there's an unexpected fee that comes in when it clears customs, who's responsible for that? And so INCOTERMS are basically a set of predefined terms that establish the details of this relationship. And I think in the garment industry, one of those Incoterms that we see quite commonly is FOB. Kim, can you explain a little bit what FOB is?
The Incoterm that we commonly use is FOB. It stands for like free on board.
Mm-hmm.
It means like the seller should bear all the transportation costs up to the port of the shipment. And the buyer is responsible for all like freight costs, insurance, uploading costs right from the port of loading. And
right,
the buyer will meet all the transportation costs from the destination port to their final destination. To their place.
Right. So, like, for example, in the process that you just described, it means the factory is responsible for getting the goods from the factory to the port.
Yes.
And then the critical moment is loading. And once those goods are loaded on the boat, then all the risk is transferred to the buyer, to the brand. And then from that point on, it's the brand who bears responsibility for the shipment. Okay, and we're going to come back to this critical moment of loading throughout the conversation. So I just want listeners to file that away and keep it in mind as we go forward.
Yes.
Yeah. Why do you think that the fashion industry often uses FOB terms?
FOB, the buyer, they doesn't think about the transport from the factory to the forwarder warehouse, and from forwarder warehouse to the port. So it's many process inside that. So when factory ready, they can manage their own track or whatever. So
right, it would be hard for a brand.
It is a bit easier for them.
Yeah, it would be hard for a brand who's based somewhere else to organize the logistics, let's say within Cambodia, from the factory to the port, right? So that's probably one reason.
And at the time, the brand that I handle, they don't have the best office in Cambodia.
And there are more reasons why the fashion industry often uses FOB terms. But before we go into that, I think it's useful to just give a little bit more of a feeling to our listeners about your day-to-day and your job. And I want to switch gears momentarily and have you share a bit about what about the most difficult part of your job, because that provides important context for what these FOB terms mean and how they're used and their consequences in practice.
Based on my experience at that time, the frustration is the factory always asks oh, can I deliver the good on Saturday at this time because maybe they are going to late in the shipping window. So they ask whether so you told your warehouse team to OT today so I can deliver the good from the factory to there, because they are afraid that when it is out of the shipping window, the buyer or the brand will ask them to to do air shipment, and the cost will be a lot more than sea shipment.
OT means overtime working.
Yes.
They ask you to ask the forwarder's warehouse team to do overtime working in the weekends.
Basically, they're trying to push for as much time as possible to get these goods delivered, right? Because they never arrive early. They always arrive
they're always
late or right at the deadline, right?
Yes.
And I think it's interesting to just point out, or to talk a little bit, because there are a lot of reasons on the factory side why there would be so many delays.
Yes.
Can you, when you were talking to factory management who asked you, oh, please, can you do overtime for me on Saturday so I can get this shipment in? Did you ever discuss about the reasons, or what's your idea about the reasons why shipments might be late or almost late?
At that time when I worked at logistic company, I just asked why you are away in the last minute. So most of the time they said oh, the quality was rejected and then they need to rework again. Or sometimes it's just they plan, they fail to plan for the production planning.
Planning is too full.
Yeah.
They might be overbooked.
Yeah, it's just the capacity is full and then it caused a delay on this PO.
Which is interesting because we talked about that in our very first episode when Jessie shared her experience with a third-party quality inspection company, and how like it can get quite complicated sometimes between the factory, the inspection company, the brand, and how kind of like these dynamics and relationships sometimes what's the word, Jessie? Like playing, yes. Playing, right? And that everybody wants the goods to be delivered on time, but at the same time the factory also wants to get a good result on their inspection report so that they can so that that inspection report can't be used against them later at the end of the season to request discounts or penalties, right?
I'm quite happy my experiences get confirmed from your side that it's true. If the result is not good, the shipment will be late and they probably are going to pay by air. That is a huge finance problem for them, for factories. Yeah.
Yes.
So yes, they want to do whatever they can to make sure the result is good. Yeah.
For our listeners who might be wondering, why don't factories just process customs themselves? Why do they use a forwarder?
Forwarder somehow is kind of like a company who coordinate between the brand and the factory to make sure everything is on time, everything is like deliver as what factory promised and logistic promised to the brand. Because the brand is working with many factory and all the shipment is like combine all the factory together.
Right.
So the factory cannot process by themselves.
And that combining of all of these shipments together, like from the brand side, combining all of these shipments together into full containers, of course, leads to better shipping rates, right?
Yes.
So part of it is maybe technical, that it's complicated, and knowing about the documents and having the relationships also with customs on the Cambodian side. That's maybe one reason for the existence of a forwarder. Another reason is about optimizing shipping rates and consolidating shipments. And I think to go back to the FOB terms, if you are under FOB terms, the buyer, the brand, has a lot more control over the freight costs, and you can get better rates by combining shipments not only from multiple factories, but also with these big logistics companies. You can negotiate rates even across countries and say, well, I'm going to use you, I'm going to make a deal with this forwarder to organize all of my shipments, not only coming from Cambodia, but maybe also from China, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right?
Yes, of course. So they can control all the costs and have a better rate on this one.
Right. And you have I think the brand or the buyer has the benefit of basically being able to leverage its size to negotiate good rates, good deals.
Yes.
Are there any other reasons that factories wouldn't just do this themselves, or that a brand wouldn't do this themselves? Is it only a matter of optimizing the shipping rates and getting the lowest costs? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
And one more thing, it's just like forwarder can be like, if they don't have any office in Cambodia, forwarder is, the role of forwarder is just like to work as the brand company to follow up everything with the factory, whether why does PO do not deliver to our warehouse? Some kind of thing.
I see. So when a brand doesn't have a representative office in a production company, the role of the forwarder becomes even more important, because all of the communication basically goes through the forwarder.
Yes.
I think that is very interesting and very important. In that way, forwarder is acting out for the brands, because forwarder is on the contract with the brands. In another word, brands are the clients of the forwarders.
Yeah.
So forwarders need to be very, 100% responsible to the clients.
Yeah, like to make sure that factory deliver to make sure that factory deliver all the finished good based on the deadline that the brand give. And as a role of the forwarder, they need to certify the brand, to make sure that all the finished goods that they require in the retail store, they need to be on time.
Yeah, and the quantities as the document mentioned. Of course, forwarders will not check each box, but there is a document packing list. Do the goods match with the information on the documents?
Yes.
So yeah, so in this way, for brands, it's more secure. It
Yes.
has less risks.
Yeah.
Yes, we need like to cross check the like CBM, the kilogram of the carton with the real. Yeah.
So from the other way around, if there is no forwarder, if factories manage customer clearance or manage this booking containers job themselves, then there is a space for suppliers might not tell the truth to the brands before the boat leaving. For instance, maybe they produce a little bit more or they produce a little bit less, and they have some motivations not to tell exactly the numbers.
Or maybe they're not done
brands.
on time.
Or maybe
Yeah.
they're not done on time. Yeah.
So I mean, like it's just like another cross check that the brand can trust.
Last gate watch, let's
Yeah,
say.
like a final checkpoint.
Yeah, final checkpoint. Yeah. Last doorkeeper.
It's interesting because it makes me think like the production facilities that I've worked in, like we had quite a lot of direct contact with the brand, with our customers. I've never really worked in we also used forwarders, of course, but we had a pretty direct relationship. And I'm thinking out loud. I don't know if either of you guys know something about this, or maybe one of our listeners knows and can tell us. But it strikes me like one of the themes that we talked about in several episodes that came up kind of organically or spontaneously is about communication between brand and supplier, between brand and factory. And now we're hearing, like, in some cases, maybe especially when there's no representative office on the ground in the production country, that so much of the communication is going through a forwarder. And it just like makes me wonder how much information must get lost in translation. You know, it's like it makes me think of, the children's game when you have like somebody who whispers a sentence into someone's ear and then they whisper it into the next person's ear and then they whisper it again into the next person's ear. And by the time you get to the end, it's like the meaning of the message is totally lost.
Or totally twisted.
Or totally twisted, yeah. And I just wonder, like surely that must happen, and surely that must affect these relationships, right? I don't know. Open question.
Maybe one of the questions are how many informations are hidden away for some reasons, for some very specific or clear reasons, either on the favor of suppliers or either on the favor of brands. For instance, why would the suppliers have motivations to not tell the truth of shipment date or shipping quantities? Maybe because they invested lots of money already, upfront cost for the materials, production, and so on. If the goods are not leaving the production country, if the boat not leaving, there is a 0% chance they can get paid. So the goods have to leave. And the goods not just have to leave, but just have to arrive. That's why FOB is also good for suppliers, because even the boat is not leaving, as long as the goods are on the boat, suppliers can hold the documents asking for payment. At least the payment process started. But if the goods are not leaving, still stay on the land, then there's no way they can get paid, I think.
Yes.
Right. And I wonder too, like, Kim, I don't know if you experienced this at all, but it's just something that like popped into my head too with like the coronavirus now, right? We have all these goods in production countries that brands don't want anymore, right? Because they have no market for them because all the shops are closed and the consumer demand has dropped significantly. So brands are trying to find ways to get out of accepting all of these inventory and goods, which they know will be very difficult to sell. Meanwhile, you have the factory, which, as Jesse pointed out, has spent all this money and investment in getting these goods ready to go. And I wonder, like, is it possible? Could you imagine a situation where the forwarder is asked to refuse a shipment from a factory so that critical moment of loading never takes place onto the boat?
Did you ever hear, or is that possible to happen, that factory receive a call from forwarder to tell the supplier saying, sorry, we received a phone call from the brand. We received confirmation saying this shipment booking has been cancelled.
In the past, like if it is like over, like that they cannot commit to deliver on time, and then when the brand didn't want to buy it at all, so it's just like, okay, we're gonna cancel this order, some kind of this.
But they need an excuse or need a reason to cancel the order, right?
Most of the time, I think it's not the intention of the brand, but it's just like the factory not deliver the good
On time. Really miss the time.
Yeah, really miss the time. So yes, it caused the cancel.
Usually this booking cancellation happens when the factories miss the shipping windows.
Yes, like very, very, very like
Not just the missing, but very, very late.
Yeah, very, very late that the brand cannot accept that kind of order.
But it's interesting too, because I know that you haven't been working for a freight forwarder company during coronavirus, but I come back to this example because it just shows how complicated it is. Because if the main reason that a shipment would be declined, let's say by a forwarder, that they say, well, we're not going to pick it up, is because it's late. There can be so many reasons for that. And in the case of coronavirus, it could be because for January and February of 2020, those factories couldn't get the raw materials that they needed from China. Right? So they had ordered all these raw materials. Those raw materials arrived late. Then they started production late. Then they missed the shipping window, which is really not any fault of their own. But still, they've paid for those raw materials and they've paid for the production and the labor that's required to make those goods. Then they miss the shipping window. And then it's like, how can you say, like, it's an easy way to wash your hands of the problem is to say, well, you missed the shipping window.
Or even a better excuse to say, yeah, I believe that's definitely happening. Or a better excuse, or even very legitimate excuse is, right, because of coronavirus, many countries locked down, many offices closed, many people work at home. So basically you cannot really deliver your goods to the warehouse because there's no one staying in the warehouse. Everywhere has been locked down. So
right.
Even you can drive the truck to the goods to the warehouse, but there's no one to receive it, to pick it up. And in the companies taking care of customer clear, there is no clearance. There's no people working in the offices.
Right. It's just shut down.
Yes.
Right. But then it's like, oh, but you didn't make the shipping window on time.
Can simply say, sorry, there's just simply no container boats at this moment for 1 month or 2 months. So our sales time definitely is missed and shops closed and goods stayed on the production country. So you can do whatever, maybe you can do whatever you want with the goods, but we are going to cancel the booking or cancel the shipment.
Right. And then it's like, for sure that factory cannot sell those goods either. I mean, they're not supposed to sell those goods because they're branded. So it's not like you can sell an H&M shirt to the Gap, or suddenly sell it to someone else. And they're not really supposed to sell it on the local market either because
Yes.
They're responsible for protecting the integrity of the brand, right? And the brand wants to control very tightly in what kind of outlets or situations their products are sold. I think, Jessie, I want to ask you actually a little bit because so we've established that, okay, the main reason, like the main sort of point of contention between forwarder and factory and brand is like whether or not the shipment is delivered on time. But there's another example that comes. So I guess if you don't know very much about the industry, you would say, well, the factory needs to just deliver on time then and be responsible for its own work. But coronavirus is one example, of course, of how this kind of gets complicated and messy, and where you sort of locate responsibility for late shipment is not always so clear. But I want to bring up one more example that's not related to coronavirus, because I want to really emphasize that it's not coronavirus is one example, but this can also happen in situations where there's nothing unusual happening in the world. And the reason I wanted to ask you to share a little bit is because I know you've worked a lot in product development. And in product development, when you're making a sample, this is one area that takes some time, right? And sometimes there can be delays there, even though the shipping window has already been defined, let's say.
Yes. Actually, it's like a counting down process. Once the shipment date is defined, or once the initiative plan is settled, then the counting down started. Basically, you count 6 weeks for production, then maybe 2 to 3 weeks for product development, and meanwhile preparing raw materials. So actually, the time window is quite tight.
Right. And sometimes it can happen that, like, okay, you have 2 weeks for product development, but actually there's a delay for some reason. We can't get the product approved, or it's not quite right. And then it takes 4 weeks instead of 2, but that your production window remains the same. So that extra 2 weeks just eats from your production timeline, right? And
Exactly,
waiting for approval is not something that's always within a factory's control either.
You just wake up all my traumatized experiences about the when I was working in Shanghai as the merchandising manager. It was really traumatized about color checking, especially if you don't use equipment. Even you use equipment, the color reading equipment, you need to ask the supplier to buy the same equipment. Yeah. Otherwise, it cannot be the same.
Yes.
So basically, we will use a light box providing a specific kind of light, which is very common, normal. Then we put the color sample, color swatch, which is a very small piece of fabric, next to a Canton book, next to the Canton color. Then we use human eyes to look at the two colors and say if the fabric dyed, if the color on that little piece of fabric looks exactly the same as the Pantone color or not. And if it's not, how much tolerance we can give. So you can imagine. So first, it's the factory product development team doing this work. They use their human eyes to check, naked eyes to check these two colors, then send it to merchandising brand side, let's say merchandising team from the brand side. Then we use our naked eyes, look at the colors, and we decide again. And if we think it's not okay, we will return it. Then the whole process start again. Okay. Then if we think it's okay, we will send by express, by air. Okay. But still needs 3, 5, 1 week, 7 days to arrive at the, buying office. Then buying office, someone is going to use their naked eyes to check the two colors again. And sometimes if the product is a very big quantity related to some big amount of money, then not just the buyer or the designer themselves, but also involved, purchasing director or the team leader to check again. So this is actually a simplified process. We already have 4 loops or 3 loops to check the colors by our naked eyes. I emphasize on naked eyes because when I see something really grayish blue, maybe someone will say, it's a little bit green. Or I say, let's say maroon. Maroon is a kind of chestnut red, or you can also call it as a chestnut brown. You see it as a yellowish brown or reddish brown. This is really a huge headache. It's nightmare. It's really nightmare.
Yeah. But you can see how, like, on-time delivery really requires close collaboration between brand and factory, and really strong communication between brand and factory. And there's a lot of room for things to go wrong. And yet when we, Kim, when you describe the process of, like, or the role of the forwarder, you see that there, like, when it comes to the forwarder and the actual delivery of the shipment and this critical moment of loading, the factory bears sole responsibility for the on-time delivery of those goods, right?
Yes.
And I think that's the important point, I think, for listeners to understand, is that the forwarder is, I think Jessie described it so well when she said it's like the final check, right? The final check before the ownership of these goods are transferred. And the timing of that delivery is so important. But all the things that affect the timing of that delivery are basically not considered at all in terms of how we locate responsibility for achieving that, right?
Yes.
Kim, I was wondering what's your idea about sustainability or the connection between sustainability and the forwarder?
From my own understanding, sustainability it means like for what we have right now, it should like our next generation should have the same. I mean, if not, we need to compensate them with like another option.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you ask me what is the connection between sustainability and forwarder, for example, I can respond example like regarding climate change. Climate change is just like there are many factors that cause climate change, but one of those is from like airplane that they pollute the air and then the carbon dioxide that from
burning the fuel, you mean?
yes. So I mean like if we have many air shipment or many cargo, like I mean from forwarder perspective, if we have many cargo and it goes by air, so it also one of the cost to the climate change.
Transportation, cargo transportation is a bit heavy topic about related to climate change or climate emergency actually. Yeah, in order to control the temperature increasing, there are a lot to do.
Right. And I think the important point to point out here is that, of course, sea shipping has a negative environmental impact as well, but the environmental impact of air shipping is even worse. And one of the reasons that we see a lot of these shipments going by air is due to delays earlier on in the production process. And currently, the way that we have for addressing this is to put in like a safety checkpoint, or you could call it like a control point, towards the end of the supply chain with the forwarder, and then locating responsibility for that delayed shipment with the supplier. But in fact, it's a lot more complicated than that. And if we were to sort of deal with that complexity head on and find solutions earlier on in the process, then probably we could also reduce the number of shipments that are going by air. Now, that doesn't negate the environmental impact of the transport of goods, but it certainly avoids unnecessary air shipping. So another less obvious way that this connects to sustainability has to do with traceability. And traceability is a pretty hot word right now within sustainability departments in brands. Brands are really keen to understand exactly where the clothes that their companies are selling are made and how they're produced. And this is an important, being able to trace where a garment comes from the farm or the raw materials that it's been made with, all the way through to its final destination with a consumer, is really important to understanding and starting to think about and analyze that garment's environmental impact. And the relationship here between forwarder, factory, and brand can get a little bit murky sometimes. And the role of the forwarder is sort of mediating the relationship between supplier, factory, and brand can sometimes obscure information that's really important for transparency and for traceability. Kim has an example that she's going to share with us, which relates to, on occasion, shipments that were received in her forwarder's warehouse, which had labels on them that said that the goods were made in Vietnam, when in fact those goods were made in Cambodia.
What happened? Can you tell us just to brief the context? And
As I remember correctly, when I work at logistic company, we used to have a problem with the label, like it mentioned like made in Vietnam, and at the time the custom random inspect the carton in that container, and then find out like there are some carton that say the apparel were made in Vietnam, and at the time it is not a legal way to do so.
Yeah.
To mix up between made in Vietnam and made in Cambodia and ship out from Cambodia country. It is illegal.
Okay. So it's not a making mistake. It's
I'm not sure whether they are lack of the label or why they use made in Vietnam, but it is not legal to ship that like make in Vietnam and make in Cambodia together.
Okay, yeah.
And
yeah.
make in Vietnam cannot ship out from Cambodia country. I
Yeah.
mean, it is illegal. So,
And it's hard to know exactly why the wrong label was used, but we can probably speculate that it has something to do with trade agreements. But the reason why this happened is sort of besides the point. I think the bigger point to underscore here is that the way the forwarder serves to kind of shield and obscure the brand from this playing that happens behind the scenes between customs, the factory, and the forwarder. And when I say shield here, really what I mean also is protect the brand from legal accountability. It's kind of a way that they don't have to get involved or know about the dirty work.
at that time, I mean, as a forwarder, we didn't deal it correctly. I mean, we didn't deal it directly with our our supplier because we have a broker. A broker, it means like we have one company who do the clearance process for us. So we ask broker to deal it with custom and factory, like how to sell it.
I see. So you have a broker is like a media doing the communication between the customer clearance and the factories when
Yes.
there is a problem related to customer clearance documents or process.
Yes, you are right. Yes. So at that time, I asked our broker to contact with the factory and the custom to solve that kind of problem.
So in this event, forwarder as a role,
Normally, we don't work with custom directly. It's just like custom inform to our broker, and then our broker inform to us like, okay, this factory has a problem, something like this.
okay.
So we just like, okay, inform to the factory, okay, you need to come and deal with our custom and our broker. Like actually, it is factory to deal with the custom, and our broker is just like a facilitator, like in the middle of these two parties.
Do you know what happened after?
I don't know actually how they deal with that. I mean, I didn't know actually whether custom asked factory to rework and replace the label or what, but what I can remember is like we can ship it on time.
Okay, that's a great news, but you don't know the details, right?
Yeah, I really don't know the detail.
Okay, that's interesting. Does it mean the factory? Okay, you actually don't know if the factory changed the goods or changed the label or did something.
Yeah, yes,
Okay, so it's very useful to have a broker in between.
yes.
And I want to shift gears one last time here before we wrap up this conversation, and that's to talk about how SOPs, standard operating procedures, also affect sustainability. Because if we think about sustainability, really, what we need is all players of the supply chain working together towards some shared sustainability related goals. And Kim's experience working with a forwarder and the relationship between forwarder and brand really goes to show how the way that we have defined roles and responsibilities and the standard operating procedures within the forwarder company affect whose interests are protected and whose aren't, and also create space for how we might think about where we need to sort of revise or re-examine what the rules are and whose interests, or maybe the planet's interests, we try and better protect.
So when you work in that freight forwarder companies, you also have SOP.
Yes, actually, we have a thick SOP, like many things in that SOP. So we got the SOP from the brand. I mean, the brand actually mentioned very detailed of every process that we need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, like a shipping window.
Okay.
What is the timeline and when we need to update the status. Yes, I mean, it contains a lot of information that as a forwarder, we need to follow that SOP.
So it's very detailed and really standardized on each small steps.
Yes, and it also a cross-check for forwarder with a factory, like okay, whether the factory respect, the timeline or not.
It's also a procedure about how you should communicate with factories.
It is not about how we communicate, but it more about like okay, for shipping window, for example, if we allow to have like 8 day of shipping window, so it means like factory also know that it is 8 day of shipping window. It's just like a cross-check system, okay. So the brand mentioned it clearly that shipping window is 8 day. So I mean like okay, factory also need to respect that 8 day. So it like okay, when I receive the finished good from the factory is out of the shipping window, it means like it need to be rejected.
So the SOP also mentioned the measures about consequences if the factory didn't follow what forwarder should react.
Yes. And that SOP it also mentioned like to like some specific destination, for example to Mexico, to Colombia, what kind of document that you need to send out after like the cargo already sent to destination.
So is this SOP really designed to, it sounds like to protect the brand's interest, to protect their profits?
I think so, because the one who create SOP, it's just like they can foresee like what will happen and what is the consequences. And to avoid that, you need to design your SOP based on that.
Okay, yeah, that's a very good point of view. You mean they already foresee all kinds of challenges, all kinds of risks.
Yeah, so like they can foresee everything, and then they can just design the SOP to protect, okay, if it happens, what is the next action?
What is the best choice for us?
Yeah.
What is the best way to manage the risks? And what shall we ask the forwarder to cooperate with us?
Yes.
Okay, that's really interesting, yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. We often think of rules as neutral arbitrators, and we forget that they've been written by someone for someone. And that doesn't always necessarily mean that they're a bad thing or that they benefit some over others. It just means that they're not neutral and interests are written in. And thinking about sustainability really requires thinking about our interests, our collective interests, and not the interests of only one party in the supply chain. And so I think that's a really interesting note to conclude on, and because it's certainly a lesson that applies to lots and lots and lots of other areas that define the way that we do business. And it's an interesting note to end on and to leave our, to ponder what is the role of standard operating procedures and how are certain interests and risks reflected and mitigated or managed within them, and how might that need to change if we really want to work on a challenge like sustainability. Kim, thank you so much for joining us. I know that we've really learned a lot from your experiences, and we're so grateful, and we hope that our listeners found it as engaging and exciting and interesting as we did.
Thank you for listening to Manufactured.
To learn more about our guests and the issues we've chatted about today, check out our website, manufacturedpodcast.com, or find us on Instagram at manufactured_podcast.
We'd also love to hear your stories and what you think. Collecting with listeners is the most rewarding part of what we do, so please don't be shy. Leave comments on Instagram or connect with us privately through our website.
To be the first to find out about new episodes, subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd also love it if you left us a review. Leaving a review helps other people find our show, and we'd love your help with that.
Thanks for listening, and see you next week.